This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
We're speaking together. This is Dennis Sandow. It's just a true honor to have Dennis with us. And so we're just checking the sound and we're making sure that we have a good connection, because having a connection is what our relationship is all about. Isn't that true, Dennis, really, in the end?
You know, from the very beginning, that has been the case. And I love that that's so. We got together pretty quickly.
Yeah, we did. And we're just getting started, I think. And that's really exciting, too. Who I have today is a very good friend, someone who I get to say is a good friend, though it's not because of the duration that I've known him on this planet. It's because we met, and as Dennis just referred to, we fell into a relationship that is allowing us to exploit or to realize, or at least to swim in this notion of a very deep human connection. And welcome, Dennis, again. It is supreme to have you on this, my podcast.
Thank you so much.
A few months ago, I was with Alexandra, and we were looking at, still another growth and development opportunity. There must be one out there that we hadn't done. So we were scouring the planet looking for at least one more that we haven't done. And a friend of mine showed up to tell me that Humberto Maturana was putting on a course. And then, before too long, we just followed our snout to signing up for that course, which is an online course that I think we'll hear a little more about today in our discussion with Dennis. Then we, as far as I can recall, before too long, the course started, and then we were assigned sort of small groups, and Dennis became the leader of our small group, or the facilitator of a small group of I think 6 or 7 extraordinary people. It turns out that Dennis and I were the only 2 men in the group, or biological men, as the case may be. And so we connected in multiple levels, while these just wickedly brilliant women around us were taking on some of the deep issues that Humberto Maturana brings to the dance since he started doing his work. And we're going to learn probably a little bit more about who he is. Dennis will tell us here in a moment. So as a member of Dennis's group, the 2 of us, when we finally started talking directly together, and I think there was at least one occasion where it was just Alexandra and Dennis and I while we were driving through Utah, Park City and Salt Lake City, Utah, and having just a truly tremendous discussion about life on that particular ride. Dennis and I have just, laid the framework for an extraordinary relationship. And I'm just trusting my listeners will be able to see right through all this introduction I'm giving you, Dennis, to the truly wonderful man that you are and what you're up to in the world and your contribution.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Before we dive into our conversation today with Dennis Sandow, I just want to take a minute to let you know how excited I am about just finishing putting together this audiobook version of my soon-to-be-released book called Creative 8. So this book teaches a surprisingly simple method for healing that utilizes primarily creativity and self-expressions as its modalities. As a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I want to give you a completely free copy of this audiobook as a deep thank you for listening to the show. All you need to do is go to welcometohumanity.net/creative. I've used this Creative 8 method with both psychiatric patients and coaching clients, and even with friends recently, for the last several years, and I've had fantastic results. The method takes actually less than 5 minutes. It totally works, and it's deep fun. So no kidding, I know you're going to love it. Go download your free copy of the Creative 8 audiobook today at welcometohumanity.net/creative. Now, let's get back to our conversation with Dennis Sandow. Dennis, like all of my guests, has submitted a little bit of a biography that, is worth paying attention to. Dennis, I've been talking too much already. Why don't you give us a little idea of who you are and where you've been?
Sure thing. My career began when I walked into a state institution holding people with developmental disabilities in Eastern Washington, about 1975. And it was out of character for me because I was mainly interested in biology and followed biology and mathematics, saved the softer courses, poor choice of words, but especially psychology, into my last year. And the first class we held was at the state institution and out of Spokane, Washington. And I found something awfully troubling, which was a group of very severely disabled people. I don't know where their disability came from. I think mostly it was being institutionalized, who were in a concrete room, no windows. It was a locked ward, no furnishings. And the only discerning feature I remember was a drain in the middle of the room. And occasionally aides would come in with a garden hose and wash the feces and urine off the people who were inside there. People were beating their head against cement walls, a lot of self-stimulation. And it brought something forth that had been quiet in my life, but very, very strong. And that was a memory of my dad's accounting for his experience in post-war Germany. And he had photographed death camps and had sent those photographs back to my mother. We often talked about shell shock that he came back with. And in that moment in the institution, my spirit connected with his. I left biology and took an oath that my work wasn't done until institutions would be closed. So most of my work was as a scientist-practitioner in the liberation movement of people with developmental disabilities. So my responsibility was to provide evidence that they could live outside of institutions and communities.
Mm-hmm. That you're saying that was around 1975 when that oath got made, or when you made these discoveries or connected with your fathers or your own ancestry?
Yes, that's right. In 1975, I began to teach children with developmental disabilities language development in a demonstration preschool at the University of Idaho. So we always had this beautiful movement. It may not seem to make sense, but somehow for us, collecting evidence that the children in this case were learning language and becoming more independent really fired us up. We got off on that so much as teachers that what it did was create just this wonderful relationship around evidence that was getting better and better and better. The realization that the people we were concerned with could live in communities, and the joy that we all had in just improvising every day on what we could do to expand the well-being of those we cared for.
Awesome. So I had the opportunity to take a look at the biography that you submitted to us for reference for this talk. And I just want our listeners to learn even a little bit more about you. I mean, it sounds like you're just a Renaissance man, and that somehow you were just on your way to a normal life, and then boom, you found something that you could not only commit your life to, but that you're not going to stop until something that isn't likely to happens in the world of transformation of the developmentally disabled population.
Yes, that's exactly right. A condition of funding was attached to the Civil Rights Act for people with developmental disabilities. So when I worked in the community and I hired people whose lives were at risk in backwards of hospitals, I had to provide evidence of their productivity because this is key to proving that they could work, earn wages, and live in communities. And then when I was in the university doing research, my research had to lead to new findings that would constantly improve upon the well-being of people with developmental disabilities. So my research turned to looking at productivity studies and multiple research methods. So I use qualitative research, quantitative research and social network mapping, and some really interesting, innovative research that came from the people that I was researching. I never thought I should be able to study them without them studying me. Mm-hmm. So that research had me begin to see networks of people engaged in a variety of things in the workplace, including supporting people who are on their way to institutions. And that led me to see that we live in a network of relationships.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting real close to the work that we've been doing together, and we'll cross that bridge in just a few minutes, I think. But there's a couple other things about what you've said that I'd love to tease out, which is this idea of having, help me out here, this idea of in your research, in order for it to have some form of impact, what I heard is needing to prove the productivity of the otherwise declared unproductive population of the developmentally disabled. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly right.
Wow. So this isn't just a matter of survival, Dennis. This is a matter of proving that if and when, I guess, set free, is that fair to say, set free from the institutions, these people would not only be able to function, that would actually be above that, would be productive members of society, yes?
Yes, that's exactly right. So there were two conditions. One was that we had to make a commitment to the most vulnerable people in Oregon's two state institutions. And so the state of Oregon was involved in looking at for those people that they thought were going to die because of physical abuse or chemical abuse in the near term. And then on the other hand, I had to start a legitimate business in Bend, Oregon, and employ those folks and collect data on a daily basis of their productivity and how their productivity changed over time. And once we became a legitimate business, we clipped $1 million in sales, I think right around 1982. Our state representative became interested in us. Isn't it interesting how politicians become interested in you when you have money?
That's what I hear. I hear that actually happens in other parts of politics too.
Right.
Yeah.
In this case, it was all good. Our state representative, Tom Troop, came into the shop, looked at the evidence, and turned to me and said, "So why are people in institutions?" And my reply was, they shouldn't be. Mm. And he left that meeting and wrote the governor saying we need to change Oregon policies and close the institutions, which we began about 1983 and finally completed in the year 2000.
Okay, so help our listeners out. I'm pretty sure, and I'm of this crowd too, that institutions of some sort continue to exist in full feathers out still to this very day. But you're talking about a certain type of institutions, and I was going to ask you that earlier. What type of institutions are you talking about that went through the closing procedure on the heels of that conversation from 1983 to the year 2000?
Now, this is really very, very important, because the institutions that were built in Oregon aren't like the ones built across the United States. Oregon was just a bit further ahead. So they built two very large institutions, one in Western, the other in Eastern Oregon, about 1904 to 1907.
Now, when you say institutions, is this synonymous with what other parts of the country might call an asylum? Is this what you're saying?
Absolutely. And in fact, that was their early name, the Fairview Asylum or Eastern Oregon Asylum.
Yes.
How one got into that asylum was a delicate matter. It came out of a theory called eugenics.
Oh, no.
And the eugenics theory, people who were feeble-minded were identified in villages, institutionalized, involuntarily sterilized, and then abandoned.
Right, and I want to make this very clear for our listeners. I know a little bit about eugenics. We're talking about this happening rampantly in our country, aren't we, Dennis? Like right here in the United States, that was what's going on, this forced sterilization stuff.
Oh, absolutely. We became a leader in the world.
Right. By the tens of thousands, am I correct?
That's right.
Yes. Okay. All right. Please continue.
While we're speaking of eugenics, Oregon's capabilities to put people into institutions were admired by eugenicists in the United States and presented to the world at an international eugenics conference in London. And it was there that two Germans became totally inspired and wrote a book on eugenics that inspired Adolf Hitler. So, the death camps look a lot like institutions, except our old institutions really didn't make explicit the killing that was happening. Mm-hmm. And so the institution I went into in Washington had a crematorium and an ash room. Mm. And so all this was happening without any transparency. And over decades, it just became a way of life. People put into the institution were seen as being a threat to the human race. They were thought to be a social virus, if you will, that could infect the whole society. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate the distinction you made because it's important. We have many institutions. We have penal institutions, in my view, for elderly people that are on Medicaid. We have institutions for young refugee children.
Yes.
But this in particular are people that we'd see today and not give them a second thought.
Yes.
People that may have Down syndrome or cerebral palsy. These were people with developmental disabilities.
Now, a little bit of so thanks for this really notable connection between the rise of the Third Reich and Adolf Hitler and its direct and total connection to eugenics and the institutionalization of these so-called feeble-minded as discovered or identified through this art and science, if you will, of at least decades, if not a whole century, committed to this notion of eugenics driving forward. And again, is there anything there you'd like to correct, or is that pretty accurate?
No, that's accurate.
Okay. So the next thing I want to really make clear to at least our listeners and between you and I, it wasn't just the obvious feeble-minded that, this included some groups that today we might not call feeble-minded or institutionalizable, or including, I suppose, eventually Jews, but we also got to the homosexual population, or just people who were oddballs or who even looked different or who acted different in various ways and weren't going to advance the gene pool using the eugenics infrastructure model. These are the people who are in the backwards of those institutions. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, that's right. What had happened is early on, through the work of Alfred Binet in France, there's a thought that we could use statistics to determine intellect. And that became a very time-intensive process. And so the American psychologist Goddard traded that process off and said, I can just send people out into these villages, and they could just talk to villagers about the people, just exactly as you say, who were different. The alcoholics, the ne'er-do-wells back then. And what's really interesting is that they weren't targeting people with observable intellectual disabilities. They didn't worry about them. They thought, well, they'll get to the institution easily. They're interested in this marginalized group they called feeble-minded, that probably looked a lot like everyone else in the village, but as you said, may be gay, may have had a dalliance with a Native American woman, might have friends who are Native American. And so the activity of identifying these people was a social political activity. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a scientific one.
Well, we could certainly, and there's so much sadness, and somehow, well, even with our present environment, what's going on out there. This is something in the backdrop of how I think. And as a psychiatrist, I've worked my time in not only prisons and jails, but inpatient units, asylums, state hospitals, and then as they gain a more comforting and illusory name, the same asylum goes to state hospital, goes to center, and things look like that the heat is off. And really, the heat isn't off for the institutions that are still running in this country. But I want to go back a little more to you specifically and the impact you had in Oregon or elsewise from 2000. Once this takes place, that these couple of institutions, right? There's 2 institutions in Oregon. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so once they're closed, where's Dennis Sandow's next step? What is it that, where's your next line of growth and development?
We did close the institutions, and the research I was doing at the university right around that time was asking a question of, okay, we changed the policy of the country using the evidence from the little business I had in Bend, and there are other satellite shops that were affiliated with the University of Oregon at the time. That created a new policy called supported employment, giving people who were job coaches, they're paraprofessionals or science practitioners, the freedom to support people wherever they were employed, instead of relying on specialized sheltered workshops like mine. And there's something very interesting happened to us. Again, we were supporting people that needed a lot of support. And the company started showing interest in our training and support methods. They were attracted to a beautiful job coach, Wendy Talaferro, and how she created this stunning positive environment where everybody was growing. And the coworkers and the managers in the company said, we don't want you to become like us. We want to become more like you. We like this environment. And so they decided to move a woman who needed very, very intense support away from Wendy into part of a factory where she was being supported by her coworkers. And the data blew my mind. What we saw was that her productivity went up tenfold, and she became delighted with the change. Her coworkers told us that when she was there, they were having their best days, and when she wasn't, they missed her. Now, this is a young woman who had no spoken verbal language, but had utterances and sounds she'd make. And she also liked to slap the butts of men. She was pretty outgoing. And what our data told us, both the qualitative and quantitative, was that there was a network of social support for her that emerged that allowed everybody in that whole area to live well and work well together. And when she became immersed in that, her productivity and well-being just skyrocketed. So that led me to a new curiosity, which was, perhaps I shouldn't be in the business of supporting people with developmental disabilities. Perhaps I should be in the business of looking at businesses through an eye of systems and networks and well-being. So at that time, 2 things happened. I was invited by Peter Senge to become a founding member of the Society for Organization Learning. I met one of my dearest friends in the world, who's Humberto Maturana, and I started working at Hewlett-Packard's inkjet business unit, and thereby basically doing the same sort of work by allowing the workers to bring forth this beautiful world of love, caring, and compassion. We saved HP over $200 million within a very short period of time. So,
yeah, it's tremendous. Go ahead.
What became fascinating to me then was how we obscure this beautiful network of love and compassion by analyzing it, by approaching it with logic, by trying to turn our living into objects, which we then use as guides and templates, instead of just letting people be and show all that they can show to us.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's just, it's mind-boggling. And, I'm all behind what you're saying. I probably speak for my listeners here by saying, oh, yeah, that sounds great. And then there's another part of me that is so stuck to the logical, analytical way that I look at life. I personally can't just reason myself out of using reason to make reasons out of stuff. And I can't, as far as analyzing, it's like, how and why is this happening? And what can I learn from that? I take things down to that common denominator, seemingly as a hardwire way of being. And it seems like it takes effort to actually see people in the way you're describing, like either effort or some exquisite education. Given that premise, Dennis, how could this come to be in the face of people being so stuck to using logic and analysis when looking at issues?
Right. And this was my search for my dad. I began to wonder about the experience I had in the institution and the experience that he had in Germany. And so I started to study eugenics and what was happening during that Victorian time frame of late 1900s or 19th century to early 20th century. And there's two really interesting books I found. One was by Karl Pearson, and he wrote about the foundation of eugenics. And the other was by Bertrand Russell, who wrote of the science of philosophy. And here's the deal that I think led to our large-scale confusion of science and theory. Russell saw a path in the road for him. One path was, should philosophy follow religion? And he automatically said, no, it shouldn't. It should follow science. And then he said something that was very powerful. And that is, but philosophy shouldn't be concerned about empirical data like science. Philosophy should only be concerned about control, because scientists control experiments. And so in that book, he said, this philosophy, this science of philosophy, will only be understood through analysis. That we can't look at relationships, we can't look at ethics, we can't look at emotions. Because if we do, we become present to a non-scientific world. And so for Russell, the science he was following was physical sciences. So the three-dimension physical universe was all that could be studied with science. Mm-hmm. And then Karl Pearson came up right behind that and said, and the observer should be separated from the observed. Mm-hmm. And we should replace human narrative with statistics. And also, marginalized people should find valor in making the ultimate sacrifice of being institutionalized. Mm-hmm. So those two things, in my mind, created a psychic curtain. They said, to make your way in the world, you have to think and act this way. And this thinking, this philosophy of logic or logic theory, intertwined with the eugenics movement. So it was also saying at the same time, and as we make our way through this world of logic and social control, we believe that it's the white man that will save the human race, although our statistics haven't caught up with that hypothesis. So what happened in that is they created our culture, our way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And although we all have daily experiences with our loved ones, with a spiritual experience, with feeling together like we've never felt before, that was negated by that particular theory.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about deductive theory now, not the inductive theory of Humberto Maturana's or others, or my scientific practice that relied on evidence.
Yes. Yes. What we have is sort of a birth or the emergence of what our culture seemingly presently continues to display very much, many of the components of what was being developed at that time.
Yes, that's right. And so we see it every day. The criterion in logic theory is that through argumentation and logic, we can reach a higher truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see it an awfully lot in our politics and in our legal professions. They're not scientists, although when we look at our city council and their legal support, we find that they will act as if they're scientists because they're acting as if they're the only discourse to the ultimate truth.
Mm-hmm.
We find this a lot whenever we're arguing over something we just collectively experienced. I might say the sky looked blue today. You might say it looks more velvet. And we begin to argue until the one who argues that point the best, quote, wins the argument, unquote.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's fascinating. And I really, it's complex in some ways and just baseline simple in others. And I think we're all experiencing what you're talking about each and every day. We experience a culture whose primary infrastructure and interrelation framework is built on so much of what you're saying was being developed specifically in the early 20th century. So one thing you mentioned, and I'd like to take a little leap here, is you mentioned Humberto Maturana's work in the world of deductive and inductive. And I'd like you to tease that out for us, since actually that's where you and I met. And we met over Humberto Maturana's work, with me taking a course and you being the facilitator in that course. Tell us a little bit, not so much, I want to get a little bit of what his work is, but as you and I know, we could talk for weeks about that. So a thumbnail about what his work is, and then what your role is, what you see the value of his work on your life, or what you might in fact also be contributing to this work moving forward, the science that you mentioned that is yours, or the ideas that you mentioned that you're putting forth into the world as a contribution. Sorry for the long question. I hope you were able to follow it.
Absolutely. Humberto did an incredible thing that attracted all of us. And this was probably back in the 1950s, when he was studying vision of pigeons and amphibians. His work was already capturing a lot of energy and attention. So there was a bridge built between MIT and Harvard because of the work he was doing in studying vision was starting to open up this psychic curtain I just described.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly what he did is he found that what we see is determined by the structure of our nervous system. They had some rather gruesome research studies where they would take the eyes of a newt out of the socket, put the right eye in the left socket in the right eye, and then when presented with a fly, surprisingly, the optic nerves would regenerate themselves, which was a miracle to me. But when they presented a fly to that newt, the fly would be on its right side and it would throw its tongue to the left. And so Umberto looked at that.
That's a ridiculous study. You understand that? I get that you could call it. I just want to make that clear that while we're listening to you, that's an insane study. But please continue.
Are you saying you don't want to volunteer for such a study?
A newt, a fly, turning eyes upside down. Come on. I mean,
so Umberto,
and then getting a world-changing result from that is extraordinary. My goodness.
It is. He wasn't the first to do that particular research. A fellow by the name of Roger Sperry had been doing it. But Umberto saw something that Sperry didn't. And what he saw was there's no independent reality out there. Mm-hmm. That truth that the logic philosophers wrote about didn't exist.
I see.
Right? Because everything that we experience happens in our nervous system.
Interesting.
So I hear things differently than you hear them. I see things differently than you see them. I feel things differently than you feel them. All determined by the structure of our nervous systems.
Yeah, let me see if I can grab this one. It sounds like what you're saying here is that reality that we call reality, with the assumption that we both know what we're talking about when we use that word, simply doesn't exist. And studies like this showing that reality is a direct function of the way our nervous system interacts with the world around us, such as when you flip a newt's eye upside down, you get the backwards response to a presented fly, and things like that. Have it be that reality that we have been calling baseline is not only questionable, but frankly does not exist as anything other than a direct manifestation of the makeup of my own nervous system.
That's exactly right. When
not bad.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
The course worked. Works for us all. And that is a profound statement that you just made, because I can validate this every day of my life. Yesterday, I went shopping for some tea for my sweetheart, Anastasia. I meant to get English breakfast. I got Earl Grey. The packaging looked the same. So I brought it back, and she said, I don't like this Earl Grey tea. I thought you were going to buy my tea. And so, of course, I said, let me apologize and go back to the store. But what happened when I was in the store is I was looking at an object, but my nervous system was telling me that it wasn't what it was. I was making a mistake. Mm-hmm. And when we realize that our mistakes always happen in the future and should never be punished. Mm-hmm. Because they're innocent. They're corrections to what we perceive as an illusion in the past. Now, what this did for me, and what Umberto's done for me, and even more so with his partner in Matríztica, Jimena Davia, is they took down that psychic curtain. Right? They took it down. Mm-hmm. They said, no, we don't look at the world through analysis. It kills the world we live in because the world operates as a system in relational behaviors and exchanges between the environment that we depend on and our daily happenings. And that brings everything possible. Mm-hmm. That says that if you and I experience a spiritual experience, and we both validate that, yes, this is what we just moved through. We lived through a spiritual experience. And what I began to realize is once that psychic curtain disappeared through the work of Humberto and Jimena in cultural biology, I was able to see systems occurring that took care of people in the workplace, that gave people freedom to do their best work. And instead of thinking of Hewlett-Packard having really good teams, I realized the wisdom of the founders, Bill and Dave. 1963, they wrote, "We prefer informal environments." And we know we prefer this because when we go home, that's what we do. So we want a company that gets together around the coffee pot.
Yeah.
We don't want to punish workers for drinking coffee. And what I realized is that these networks of love or social systems I was studying in business are actually our preferences to live well together in our daily living inside and outside of business.
Yeah, the way to live in the workplace isn't very distinctive from the way to live anywhere else.
Exactly. And the other thing I realized was that when I looked at the world and explained the world through logic theory, and then went home to live with my lovely Anastasia and 2 children, I was leading 2 lives.
Exactly.
Right. So in the workplace, I might find it valuable to say, let's explore emotional intelligence. But if we had a tough month and our funds were tight, and my sweetheart was telling me, maybe you shouldn't be golfing for the 10th time this month so we can afford a little bit of this.
Right.
I wouldn't say you need to be enrolled in an emotional intelligence class.
Right.
And so with Humberto's work, my world became one world.
Really fascinating. So I totally get what you're saying. I have an experience in my life that sounds like it's at least parallel, if not resonating directly with what this is. This idea of, I think the word that came to me a couple years ago was this idea of the inherent duplicity of my life when I was being Dr. Moss versus when I was being anything else, Fred, out here with my friends and colleagues. And that duplicity had me doing things as Dr. Moss that Fred would reject or even not even see as like plausible. And nevertheless, both of these people, both of these me's, if you will, coexisted. And there was something in the work, in my case, in Werner Erhardt's work and others, that had me going all the way down to zero, all the way down to nothing, all the way down to questioning this reality that I had being so, like really down to the brass tacks that this reality that I had so much been banking my life on was entirely made up and didn't exist. That gave it's sort of counterintuitive, isn't it, Dennis, that when you annihilate a sense of a reality existing, that there's an immense amount of freedom that arises from that instantaneously.
Oh my goodness. I mean, Fred, that is, I think what excites me most today is through this work and then through reflecting on our daily living, how we live well together and live well by ourselves, we do move into this liberation. Those chains of the psychic curtain, that's two bad metaphors, but the psychic curtain no longer obscures our view. And so I think you're exactly right. We become free, and in that freedom, we're more spontaneous, we're more responsible, because we're also realizing that this present moment is the only one we live in. And things, as you referred to, become even more simple, because instead of talking about the act of loving as a theory, we just love.
Yeah, there's something about that. There's something about the experiential or the ontological or the discovery that occurs in this now that is no longer restricted by the preconceived notion of a pre-existing reality that allows for a new way of thinking that, in fact, for me, one of the secrets of this thing, one of my secret go-tos, which seems like I have to use it like at least 50 or 100 times a day, is my capacity to be able to reset You see, like when I still get caught up in some sense that I now have an idea of what reality is and then it's not working, I have in my back pocket the capacity to reset to the fact that, wait a minute, that isn't reality. There is no reality. And in that reset, I can start from zero and frankly, almost put a smile on my face and embrace whatever experience is coming down the corner. Any experience. Extraordinary.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel the same, that when I'm doing a lot of work in community organizing now around an effort that's going to affect our neighborhood. And I find when my blood pressure starts to raise, when my emotion starts to become negative and I get angry, what I'm doing is I'm responding to the oppression I have felt from that former way of thinking and denying myself love, spirit, systems. And it's not to say I discount logic, but I find I am emotionally tied up because I'm in a community that will only use logic and overlook the pain and suffering that's emotionally available to everyone.
Isn't that right? Yeah.
And so for me, we've talked about this before, Fred. There's 3 weeks out of the summer that I go talk to Cooper hawk fledglings. I need to do that. I walk every morning at sunrise, and my sweetheart and I walk 4 miles a day, and I have found that I need that. I need that reflective time to decompress and let my soul kind of come back to earth.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I live close enough to the ocean that I think I get that type of resetting as well. And where, just getting out there in the evening or when I'm lucky in the morning and just seeing all the beautiful contrast of the world that exists beyond anything I take as being important during my everyday life is just so beautiful and resetting and frankly, just humbling as well as gorgeous, just like revitalizing at the soul level.
And, I've wondered about this as being some synchronization of harmony. Because naturally, we're loving beings. We like to do things well together. We follow those preferences of living well together and taking care of one another. And that manner of living is mostly in harmony with the environment around us. And I felt that ill ease today when my son called and said, Caden, my grandson, was in the high school championship basketball tournament, and last night they called it off.
Yeah.
And now schools are shutting down. The university is shut down.
Yeah.
So now we feel this ill ease again around, we don't like this social disruption. How can we return to living well together?
Right.
How can I go on living well together when I've been looking for 5 months towards this coming Monday when my grandson would play his first baseball game?
Yeah.
Well, baseball's not going to happen now.
Wow. So you're right. There's some beautiful resonance here. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on today, because today really almost we have to talk about what's going on today at 5:00, because we both know it's going to look different. And there's just this rapid influx of whatever's happening with coronavirus. And, the police aren't in the streets yet, but at the same time, we're talking about decreasing the right to assemble. We're talking about things shutting down all over the world, basically billions of dollars being tossed back into the basket, and all people having their lives altered by rules and regulations. And way beyond whether you agree or disagree, there's some mass social, I don't want to use the word manipulation, but it's like, mass, like the capacity to social control. There's a new level of social control that we're at least being challenged by when we look out there for our reality. Okay, when we look out there for our reality. And I have noticed the last couple of days, specifically, when I get caught up in that world that you're talking about, looking at that reality as being mine, it becomes almost instantaneously disempowering. And what's here for me is to remember or to take on that reality is also only the outside, and that my sanity is my own responsibility and is an inside job. So what I use to stay sane, and I'd like to hear your views on this, the coronavirus and the hysteria, nothing less than global hysteria that's going on here now, which seems to have not lost its momentum in even one iota, is taking us all by surprise, or taking us all and recorrecting our pathways, or asking us to figure out a new way to exist, a new way to survive, or even at a very higher level, a new way to be satisfied, or to be pleased, or to love, or to be honorable, or to be graceful with our, we can't touch people anymore. We can't shake hands. We can't touch our own face. We have to wash up there's so much going on in the outside demands. And it's really having me see that I need to look inside myself to find my solitude. I need to find my serenity. And that's where I'm finding it. So the coronavirus is here with us. And, I can't help over the last 20 minutes bringing up the idea of the institutionalized folks, your developmentally disabled folks being so extraordinarily functional at the leadership level. How do I bypass the possibility of making a comment about how feeble-minded our present leadership is, and maybe not doing as sweet a job as some of the folks that you were able to assist in growth and development? But enough political, we could go off on that too, of course, Dennis. The question that I have for you, as we approach nearly the end of this hour, is, what does it look like moving forward to you? Where are we at? What crisis point or what pain point is society or yourself as a leader in society? Where are we pointed, Dennis? What are the things that are on the table right now, either make or break, or that you feel either confident or highly disturbed by, that tweak you to the point of recommitting some of your contribution to particular aspects of life?
Yeah, that's such a wonderful question. And thank you, Fred, because it has been one that I think about a lot these days. And I would have to say that if humans need to end their addiction with physical products, physical goods, physical science, and logic theory, we absolutely have to confront the fact that there's no longer any value in looking at ourselves through that lens. And to proceed, I dearly hope and pray that we will deepen our understanding of who we are naturally as biological beings, that we're loving, that we're caring, that our social nature is to collaborate, respect one another, take care of one another, and that this era that we're in right now, that's the virus has brought to us, is challenging that very issue because it's saying, don't be social.
Exactly. It's a direct right at the heart of the matter of don't be social, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's telling us, stay at home and depend on this digital universe to make your way. And because we don't have, at least I don't have access to testing for the coronavirus, I'm left to make my way through that digital world in a very brutal fashion.
Yes.
In fear. My sweetheart has bronchial issues. And so I talked with my son about it today. All of my actions are based on her, but I lack any evidence or data that would allow me and my neighbors to make our way forward.
Right.
And so if this phenomena of interfering and disrupting our natural social relational behaviors continues over time, I'm just very, very worried, Fred. Yeah. Aren't you?
Yes, I am. And I really am. I'm deeply worried. And that's where I'm left with what I've created with my friend Sanika, is this idea that the answer here, it's my sanity is an inside job, but really my answer is for me to go inside and to go upward, meaning find myself, this myself as defined by at least the resultant of me taking on the duplicity that we earlier talked about. If so, finding myself and, coming to grips with that person, like me coming to grips with that person. Of course, not shaking his hand, though. We know better than to do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then going upward, like through the chimney, like, okay, it is game on. Any of my so-called laziness or complacency or lackadaisical edginess or my own addiction to Facebook or my electronics, it's time for my humanity to show up like the ocean, to show up like the birds, or be that love machine that I already am. You see, that's the thing, is I don't have to learn anything. I have to unlearn to get to the fact that I already am that. And that's the only answer that makes any sense when challenged at this comprehensive level. That's at least the game I'm finding myself clinging to, and not only clinging to, but then committing, dedicating, and then redoubling my effort non-negotiably to move in that direction.
This is my experience as well. There's a younger couple that are friends with Anastasia and I, and they're taking care of people our age who have been put into nursing homes to the point where the people can live independently in the community again. So one fellow I'm thinking about hadn't walked in 4 years, and now he's out in an apartment and he's walking.
I love it. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I don't make any joke about it, nor do I hide it. I tell them both when I'm with them, I love you so much. This is wonderful. And I'm learning that they're telling me I'm easing some of their pain and suffering. But also we become engaged in a conversation around what if we were to generate carrying capacity for our elders in such a way that nursing homes didn't have to exist.
Oh my goodness! Well, that's the next iteration of the end of the institution, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's funny how things come full circle. But in that case, we're asking the question here in Eugene, Oregon, and you know Eugene well, Fred, is wouldn't elders in Eugene prefer to live around a common garden and be supported in a hippie type environment?
Beautiful.
By young people? Or would they prefer to live in a medical model institution?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is inspiring to me. It's just right. Up through the chimney. Let's take it all the way.
Yeah, let's go. It's really game in. It's really all in is what it is.
Yes.
It's really all in. This is not like all in except for the little piece I want to preserve anymore. No, that's not here anymore. And somehow for me, the way that the election is going, and then, the way, and on top of that, sort of the ultimate distractor of our lifetime seems to be this rapid emergence of the coronavirus megalohysteria, that I am now being asked, okay, what do you got, Fred? What have you picked up in 62 years? Because what you have is what you need now, and that's what you need. You need every piece of that. What do you got? And I respectfully accept that challenge, realizing at some level that I'm mortal. Like realizing, oh yeah, this is real time. This is real time, and there's an opportunity to actually find peace of mind in the midst of all this chaos. Like really the true and honest source of peace of mind can be approached even further, and maybe even as a response to this crescendoing chaos that we're experiencing in the world around us.
Yes, that's been our thinking and inspiration as well within Matríztica. We've developed this online course on cultural biology so we don't have to travel anymore. Now, this was just an accident in our thinking. Dr. Maturana is 92, And we thought, well, whatever we do shouldn't be around getting in airplanes and traveling to places. So part of this for us is do our very best work, be the best we can be in creating an online experience that brings us back into this conversation that you and I are having.
Yeah.
How do we live well together? Who do we prefer to live with? And just as you're saying, let's go do it.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Well, I think this is a pretty good place to taper down, I think, Dennis. Is there anything else you want to say to my listeners? Hey, listen, I'm guessing there's going to be a chunk of them, who knows, hundreds or even more, who are interested in learning a little bit more about what you're up to or how you got to be you or coming in contact with you. If someone wanted to know a little bit more about Dennis Sandow, how would they find a way to follow you or to get in touch with you for that purpose?
Yes, there'd be two paths in the digital world. The first is my company called Reflexus. That's REFLEXUS.org. And there is a library of a lot of Humberto's work. I blog there, not a whole lot. I'm just starting it. And the other is through Matríztica, MATRIZTICA. There are two other things in process right now. Sebastian, who is with the Matríztica team, and I have just submitted a paper to the Harvard Business Review on creating a theory of well-being for working scientists.
Awesome.
And we studied a group of scientists who invented the H1N1 flu diagnostic.
Oh my God, really? Yeah, a cousin to our main friend here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I'll be delighted to share that with you, Fred, if anyone's interested in that. And then I'm also in the final stages of finishing a book I've been writing for quite some time. So the digital access, and then there's some new writing that we're doing both in South and North America as part of the Matríztica team.
Awesome. When people find us here, they'll have your contact information on the front page. So they'll be able to click that and know a little bit more about who you are. We'll put a little piece about you there as well. So I'm here with Dennis Sandow, and it's been an amazing conversation and a heady conversation, but really a heady conversation about the world around us and really giving up in many ways, using simply our head to explore what it means to be alive in the present plane, in the present astral plane, in the present earthly existence, like really looking at what does it mean to be a human and what does it not mean to be a human and what really drives us. And these are some of the things that we touched on in today's conversation. So, Dennis, it's just been a deep pleasure being with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It sort of builds onto the shoulders of the other conversations that we've had that already were through the cloud. So I thank you for being with me. I thank you for being my friend. I thank you for who you are for humanity and for who you are for your family, your lovely family, and for the things that you're doing for your community, for the society, for the local community, for the disabled or perhaps the disenfranchised, and that you just continue to take massive, big steps like let's do it into the world. So thank you for being you, and thank you for being on my podcast with me today.
Thank you so much, Fred. I look forward to more conversations to come with you.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. You know, what I'm walking away from this conversation with Dennis is this is a man who has really had a life and has loved people every minute of it. And he's found so many ways to contribute to other people, to learn from other people, and to continue to be a beautiful human being. What an excellent example of humanity that we've had today on our podcast show. Perhaps as you were listening, you thought, wow, I know some people who would really love to hear this episode. Why not reach out to them right now and invite them to listen and to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast? While you're at it, I'd like to ask you a small favor, which is go ahead and take a moment and hit the subscribe button on your podcast player. That way, you'll get the latest episodes as they become available. And secondly, if you really appreciate what we're doing here, could you just take a few minutes and give us a good review on the Apple Podcast? Subscribes and reviews are the best ways that we get to reach more listeners with the Welcome to Humanity podcast. So if these conversations contribute to you or move you in any way, go ahead, pay it forward, subscribe, leave a review. We'd all be truly grateful for your support.
To catch up with past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. Until next time, this is Dr. Fred. It's been another wonderful episode of Welcome to Humanity Podcast. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of the ones you love. We'll see you on the next go-around. Bye for now.